Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for watching this African American Quilters of Baltimore video. My co-host is Deborah Kinsey. Deborah, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Carol. I appreciate that wonderful introduction. We are so happy to be able to share the Sudoku quilts we made during our recent AAQB challenge. Our challenge started in November of 2020. We presented the challenge to the guild members and asked them to participate if they were interested. We first asked them to select their personal block size and then select 9 unique fabrics or block designs. We asked them to use the Sudoku puzzle result, and we'll share that with you on a later screen. Also, we asked them to assign 1 to 9 to each fabric or block design. We then asked them to piece the 81 blocks together, and the quilt tops only were due by the March 2021 meeting. At that time, we had a slideshow presentation, somewhat like you're going to see today, where we did a reveal of all the Sudoku quilts that were created by our members. This is the puzzle that we asked everybody to use to make their quilts. And as you know or may not know, a Sudoku puzzle has the numbers 1 to 9 within the puzzle design. There are to be no repeats of 1 to 9 in any row, any column, or any 9 patch. And then we replaced the numbers with a fabric and then made the quilt based on that design. So congratulations to everyone who completed the challenge. You did a fabulous job, and we have 29 participants in the reveal, and we're actually going to share 32 quilts with you today. This first quilt is mine, Deborah Kinsey. I actually made this Sudoku quilt close to 15 years ago. I used it as an example to show the guild members what a Sudoku quilt could look like. I selected some of the favorite fabrics in my stash to make this quilt. I quilted it myself by stitching in the ditch. The blocks are 3 inches finished. And I love the liveliness of the quilt, and I especially like the William Morris fabric included in the center with that beautiful blue plumage. This next quilt I started several years ago, and it was in progress, but I finished it for the challenge. As you can see, I used African fabrics. This quilt likewise has 3-inch finished squares, and I used some sashing in between to break up the 9 patches. Here's a close-up so you can really see the many fabrics that I used. And here's a close-up of the quilting, which I'm especially happy about. Sue and Bill Taylor quilted this quilt for me, and I really like the African fan design they used with gold thread. It makes the quilt look regal. Finally, my third quilt, which I started during the Sudoku challenge in 2021, represents my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta. I used the various symbols related to my sorority, the colors, crimson and cream. The crest is on here, the Greek symbols, the African violet. And I really, really enjoyed making this quilt. Here's a close-up before it was quilted. Now a close-up of the quilting. If you may note that the quilting is triangles, and that represents the Delta symbol. Again, As you can see, as a result of the 3 quilts I've just shown you, each one is uniquely different, but allowed me to express my creativity in different ways. And I definitely enjoyed making each quilt. Carol Burnside, would you please unmute yourself and share something about your quilt?
Thanks, Deborah. I enjoyed this challenge too. You can probably tell that this quilt is a top only. It hasn't been quilted or bound yet. But the inspiration for this quilt was a coverlet that I bought for a bed a number of years ago. And it was kind of like a modern quilt in a sense, because it had a lot of negative space, a lot of white. And then it had all the colors that you see on this quilt in large floral patterns around on the white. And I love the look of it, but it was one of those kind of coverlets that should be able to be washable, but is not. And so I know it's not going to last long. So I wanted something that was reminiscent of that. And so I bought these different fabrics to make things for that same bedroom. And I decided to use the fabrics in the Sudoku quilt, which I will hang on the wall behind the bed when it's completed. I love the fabric that I used for the sashing, and it has all the colors of the blocks, but the contrast wasn't as great between the blocks and the sashing as I had hoped. So I was advised at Soback to put a large white rickrack down the middle of each sashing, and I'm going to do that, and I think that does make the sashing more prominent. So I enjoyed the challenge very much, and thanks for letting us talk about our quilts.
Thank you, Carol. Patricia House is not on the call today, and I will be sharing some information about her quilt. This quilt was made from fat quarters that all had different size metallic dots. And as you can see, Patricia used sashing between her 9 patch blocks. Here is a close-up of Patricia's quilt, where you can see the quilting pattern that she used, very thoughtful and very appropriate for this quilt. Bright and colorful. It's going to make some happy owner very happy. Jackie Simpson, would you please unmute yourself and tell us about your quilt?
Hi, this quilt is made with 3-inch squares. And even though the colors are different, they had the same feel. In order to complete my quilt family, I use sashing to pull it all together. And also I embroidered it with a star motif, once again, to pull the whole quilt together. And one more thing to make it unique and cohesive, I used a button, different types of buttons, but the buttons in the same family. Thank you for letting me be a part of this.
Thank you, Jackie. Charlotte, would you please unmute yourself and tell us about your quilt?
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to be able to share my process for making our Sudoku quilt challenge. I found in my stash 2.5-inch squares of jacquard batiks, very beautiful colors, I felt, and I was able to find at least 9 of each. I shared the process during the making of this quilt so that Deborah could see how my thinking went. In the next photograph, you see that I have started to put those blocks together. The blocks ended up being about 5.5 inches each. The quilt itself is about 24 by 24. And I use 2.5-inch sashing and 2.5-inch for my borders as well. And this is the quilt completed. It was quilted by a local quilter, Maria O'Haver, and she just used a plain panto from edge to edge. And I enjoyed the process. And a close-up of the panto and the process with the squares for the Sudoku puzzle. The label that I made and printed on, hand printed, as well as the hanging sleeve for the quilt. It's a wall hanging. And thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Brenda Harrington is not on the call. I would like to present her quilt. Her quilt is vibrant in purples and pinks and fuchsias. And she has some thinner sashing between her 9 patches. It's quite a lively quilt. And here's a close-up for you. You can see her lively fabric designs that she picked. Many of them have circles and geometric shapes. And again, each of these quilts invite themselves to allow the maker to be as creative as possible. Brenda donated her quilt to Sickle Cell Quilts, one of the charities we serve in our guild. And here's another close-up after she had it quilted. And she has a nice swirly quilting design. Carol Cannon made her quilt in oranges and blacks. She used a somewhat larger sashing between her 9 patches and blocks in between them as well. And here's a close-up of Carol's vibrant quilt. Mary Walker, would you please unmute yourself and tell us about your quilt?
Well, my quilt is made from some material someone gave me, and I put it to the side. So when Deborah gave the challenge, I looked in my little stash and found them, and I was very excited to do them. My daughter was there that weekend when I selected my fabric, and I had this little block pattern, this little block ruler that's 6 by 6, and I made all my blocks that way. So it was kind of simple to do and a little easy to do. And I really enjoyed doing the quilts. So I found all the colors together and I quilted it. I'm starting to learn, I'm learning how to do machine quilting. And this was my first quilt that I machine quilted on my own. So I really enjoyed the challenge.
Thank you, Mary. Denise, would you please unmute yourself and tell us about your quilt?
Hi, yes. So this quilt, I wanted to experiment with using batik fabric and African fabric. So I reached out to one of our AAQB members, Paula Rooks, and bought a whole bunch of batik fabric. And I just played around with it. The blocks started, so I cut out 3.5-inch blocks and pieced them together, and then cut them down to, I believe they were 8-inch blocks. And then I used the African fabric and cut those out as 8 inches as well, and just pieced it together. You know, I really enjoyed the process of making the blocks and trying my best to get, you know, use those 1/4-inch seams and try to get everything to line up. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But overall, I was just really pleased with the whole process. So that was that one. And so the second one, I did it again, tried the process again. And actually, this was a gift to a cousin of mine. Every year, she crochets a hat and scarf for me. So I thought, well, maybe I will return the favor and make her a quilt using the fabrics from the first quilt and a different African fabric. I believe I got that one from, it was either Cultured Expressions, or in Baltimore City, we have Everyone's Place. And it's a cultural arts business that sells fabric and African American books and just all kinds of stuff. But again, I just wanted to kind of stay with my stash. But this one again was a gift for a cousin who was always looking out for me. So the backing, what I did is I had a large piece of fabric and used that as the backing. And instead of the hanging sleeve, I used the hanging triangles. And so you take a square and you fold it, a shape, and then you put it on the corners of the quilt, and then you use that to hang your quilt.
Thank you, Denise.
You're welcome.
Karen R. Newman's quilt, as you can see, is quite lively in purples and blues and greens. She pieced some of her squares. You see some quarter square triangles that are pieced, and that adds interest to the quilt. She also shared that she used scraps from another quilt to make this quilt. Again, as with any challenge, you can use all sorts of creativity to create your end product. And so we truly appreciate Karen R. Newman sharing her quilt with us. Mildred Johnson. Mildred Johnson's quilt is a large quilt, as you can see. She uses blacks and whites and reds, quite a popular design, set of colors that people use. She used all sorts of geometric shapes, and she did not use any sashing between her blocks. And here's a close-up of those vibrant fabrics that Mildred Johnson used on her quilt. Clarissa G. Price. Clarissa's quilt uses fuchsias and maroons and yellows. And Clarissa tends towards using antique type fabrics that look somewhat antique, and that's part of her style. So Clarissa did a great job in putting together her quilt based on her personal style. And here's a close-up of Clarissa's quilt. Danielle, would you please unmute yourself and tell us about your quilt?
Hi, thank you for letting me be a part of this Sudoku challenge. With my quilt, I used 5-inch square blocks, and my sashing was 2.5 inches. So I put the sashing between the blocks because I thought it would make my colors pop out a little more. It was long arm quilted by a quilter that I use named Jerry McConnell. And so she does all of, actually she long arms all of my quilt edge to edge. And let's see, the total size of the quilt is 46 by 46 inches. The choice of the colors, I just love these particular colors. They just seem like they go together well to me. One thing I did not put on my label, which has now inspired me to put this as a part of my quilt labels now, is the fabric line that I use, because I don't remember if this was a particular, I believe it was a particular fabric line that was put together. So I really enjoyed making it. It was the first time. I used to do the puzzles, but it was really nice to do it with the fabric. And that was a nice little challenge for me.
Thank you, Danielle.
Mm-hmm. Thank
Sue,
you.
would you please unmute yourself and tell us about your quilt?
Hi there. I'm a beginning quilter and mine is still a top. It's not yet quilted. I'm more of a piecer at this point than a quilter. I have a lot of cat lovers in my life, and several years ago, I started just accumulating cat fabrics with the idea that someday I'd make a cat quilt for one of these cat lovers. And it turned out to be this quilt. Because all of the prints were so busy and so much activity in the quilts, I used sashing between the parts in order to avoid any cat fights between the fabrics. And because the fabrics were big graphics, I had to use big squares. They're 6-inch squares. So this quilt turned out to be ginormous. And it's going to certainly be enough for a queen bed when it's eventually quilted and finished. It was great fun, and it used fabrics that I had been playing with for years. And I'm real pleased with the result.
Thank you, Sue. Our next quilter is Barbara White. As you can see, Barbara used some very vivid blues as fabrics for her Sudoku quilt. Her layout is a little bit unique in that she laid 3 9 patches in a row together and used sashing to separate the rows. And I had never seen anybody use that technique. Also, Barbara chose to actually embroider the word Sudoku on her quilt, just to let people know this is a Sudoku quilt. And here's a close-up. Again, as you can see, these vivid blues, and I know I'm a blue lover, so I really enjoy looking at her quilt and marveling over the pretty blue fabric. Elizabeth Wake's quilt has a theme to the fabric. If you take a close look, you see the words creative woman in the border, and many of the fabrics have something to do with sewing. Let's get a close-up so we can see some of that. If you look closely, you see many different themes about color, and I see crayons. And so you will find people who will use novelty fabrics, somewhat like Sue did too, to make their quilts, and they'll try to keep the same theme. But this is also a large Sudoku quilt. She also, like Sue did, used sashing between the 9-patch blocks. And again, she probably did it similarly for the same reasons Sue did, to break up some of the busyness of that novelty fabric. So I guess great minds think alike. Kim Hall, would you please unmute yourself and share about your quilt?
Thanks. I was really excited that the opportunity this challenge produced for me to use a set of fat quarters that have been in my stash for a while. The quilt is called The Oldest Art. It uses primarily fabric designed by Aboriginal artists, women Aboriginal artists. The blocks are 4 inches finished. The sashing are batiks that kind of go along with the kind of wavy and dotted look that you see in a lot of Aboriginal art. I went to Australia in 1998 and went to some art galleries, and that was my first exposure to work by women like Emily Kengorai and Glenda Petyarwe. And so since then, I have periodically added some to my stash. And so this happened to be a group of fat quarters that were hot colors, like yellows to oranges to reds. There are the black and white fabric that you can see like in the middle block in this screen is actually a piece of fabric I bought in 1998. It is not by an Aboriginal artist, but made by an Australian company, kind of inspired by that look. So it kind of incorporates the kind of arc of my interest in Aboriginal arts. And I think that's it. Like I said, I was really grateful to do it. Oh, thank you. I also, because I wanted to try to name some of the women in M&S Textiles, which is an Australian company that recruits artists to make fabric for them, they put in the salvages the name, but in the fat quarters, you don't always get the salvage. So I just went on a hunt finding the name of the women who designed the fabrics I used, and I tried to incorporate that into the label in the back. The back is big pieces of some of this material that I've had in my stash, and it was quilted by Sylvia Hernandez, who is the president of the Quilters of Color Network of New York, which is the guild I belong to here in New York City.
Thank you, Kim. Mary Matthews' quilt is another large one. As you can see, she has it hanging outside on the line. And she, like some of the others that we've shown, used red, white, and black. Quite a stunner. And as you can see, what I found unique was that she put blocks in 2 of the corners of the quilt, but not in the other 2. The other 2 have mitered corners. So I found that to be very interesting. And here's a close-up. You can see some puppy dogs on some of her fabrics, some wording on some of her fabrics, some bones. I see some puppy paws in the shape of hearts. So she used some novelty fabric in hers as well, which is always a lot of fun. Melinda Newton's quilt is also shown outdoors, which makes it look quite exciting and vibrant. She has some beautiful large flowers on some of her blocks, and she did fussy cut those. She did give us a key about her blocks. So number 1 is the fussy cut flower, and then number 2 is more flowers, but cut differently. 3 is more flowers cut differently, but they're all from the same fabric. And 6 is from that same fabric as well, but just fussy cut differently. And then her block number 8, she points out, is actually a piece block with 2 bright pinks seamed together. And she added a green and another color like a mauve, and then another color with a white background to just add variety to her quilt. So that's a little bit about her process, as I'm sure most of you went through some sort of process to decide what to use and how to use your fabrics. And here's another picture of her quilt outdoors, a close-up. Camilla Younger's quilt is another large one. Her quilt, her squares are 8-inch squares, and her quilt finished at about 82-inch square, so it's really large. Camilla shared with me that she didn't even know what Sudoku was until she heard about the challenge. So she enjoyed learning about Sudoku, and hopefully she will be even more interested in the puzzles too, because as I certainly think Sudoku puzzles are fun, but I definitely like using fabric instead a little bit better. So this is Camilla Younger's quilt for you to enjoy. Oh, and as you can see, I'm not sure I mentioned it, these are African fabrics that she used. And here's a close-up, and you can really see the African motifs in her fabrics up close. Tarsha, would you please unmute yourself and share with us about your quilt?
Sure. Thank you, Deborah. My quilt was a challenge because I'm using woven fabrics. Each of the blocks are actually 6 inches, and I chose the woven fabric as it was a gift to me, and I've not quilted with woven before, and the challenge was trying to make sure that the pieces didn't run. With each block, I kind of put a siding on it to give it just a little bit of a different twist to it, and which made it fun. I'm a big time Sudoku person. I do the daily Sudokus every day, both on my iPad and my phone, which gives me the option to do 12 games a day. So
Wow.
this was a really good challenge for me, and it's inspired me to now do a super Sudoku in the future, which will have nesting blocks together.
Wow. So Tarsha, when you say a super Sudoku, are you talking about a super Sudoku quilt?
Yes. Yes.
Wow, I cannot wait to see
Yes.
it. And this one is certainly unique. We had none like this, and I had never seen one laid out this way. So you, I think because of your love of Sudoku, it allowed you to even stretch even more and do
Yeah.
something creative.
Yeah. I mean, the blocks don't look square because I rotated them, but they are actually all the same size. So,
Interesting. Wow. Wonderful. I'm so glad you got to do something with quilting fabric that also fell in line with your love of Sudoku puzzles.
thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tarsha.
Yep.
Sandra Ely's quilt has numbers on it. She used school color brights, is what I call her colors. They look like school color crayon brights. And she appliqued a large pencil in the middle to even remind you more of school. It was interesting the way she put the numbers on the blocks. And as I looked, I could see that the numbers did relate to the colors of her blocks. So she has several 2s on yellow, several 3s on a bright red, several 4s on a bright orange. Again, this is just an example of different people using their creativity to do something different and unique with this challenge. She used very thin sashing between her 9 patches. And again, it shows the various choices one can have as they work on these quilts. And she gave her quilt a name. Not everybody gave their quilt a name, but I recommend you give your quilt a name. And Sandra's name of her quilt is School Days 1, 2, 3. And here's a close-up. You can really see those numbers. Rosalind Robinson, would you please unmute yourself and tell us about your quilt?
Thank you, Deborah. My quilt is titled Sudoku Squared. I love playing Sudoku with a pencil and a paper newspaper in my hand every day. And I've gotten away from doing my Sudoku puzzle on paper. And so I view this opportunity as another opportunity to do something that I enjoy with quilting, Sudoku and quilting. So I accepted the challenge and I made this Sudoku squared, is what my quilt is called, with 4.5-inch finished blocks made from batik cottons. And I put a 1-inch border around the outer edge without having any sashing in between the blocks, and then a 5-inch border around the entire quilt, which blended right into the binding, which matches the outer sashing. I don't usually do my own quilting, but on this one I did, because I wanted to add some fluid lines to the squares. I love making squares, and I wanted to add some fluidity to it. And so I made some wavy lines from the top to the bottom and to soften the lines a bit. And this quilt does have wool batting, so it does have a lot of puffiness to it, and it measures 50 by 50 inches complete, the complete outer edge. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind.
Mhm.
Edith Blackwell's quilt uses African fabrics, and it is large, it is vibrant, it is lively, and it is beautiful. She used thin sashing in between her 9 patches and a vibrant, bubbly set of circles around the edges. Here's a close-up of her fabrics, as you can see them. And she put her next to one another in the middle with no sashing, and they still blend together nicely without that. So it's nice that that worked out well for her. Ruby Waite's quilt is black, brown, and cream. And it has a theme of the stars and the moon. She has a border around the edges, and her fabric is very novelty looking and has a lot of activity on it. And here's a close-up of Ruby Waite's quilt. And it's always fun with this type of project if you choose to use novelty fabric and stay in theme. Mary Brown's quilt uses greens and some blue. And as you can see, she must really like panda bears because she features panda bears on her quilt. She has sashing between her 9 patches and a not too wide border around the edges. And she has a vibrant color in her binding. Here's a close-up, and you can really see those panda bears. And her quilting looks lively, circles and very lively, just like those playful panda bears. Anita, would you please unmute yourself and share with us about your quilt?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for letting me participate in this. I used scraps that I had, but I like blues and greens and that Caribbean feel because my family's from Barbados. And in Barbados, one of the things you have to do is go see the turtles. So for each fabric that I assigned a number to, I appliqued the number and a turtle, the shape of a turtle in each 9-patch block, so that if you look at it long enough based on, you know, which one is number 1 and which one is number 2, then you can figure out the rest of the Sudoku pattern. The squares are 3 inches. And I've never done anything like this. It was a lot of fun. And I really am glad that Deborah gave me the instructions that she did and let me see what some other people had done. So this was a lot of fun. I put the white sashing in between to try and kind of, you know, make it easier to offset and see what each block did in terms of which fabric was which number. So thank you very much for letting me participate.
Thank you, Anita. Our final quilter is Ruby B. Nelson. Ruby's quilt is large, and she took pictures outside of her large quilt. I find it so interesting that she has those lines on the angle like that and what she had to do to make that happen and make it work. Very interesting. And then she has very bright, vibrant designs in her borders at the top and the bottom. Very interesting design. And here's a close-up of her quilt. And as you can see, again, the design is vibrant and interesting, and it's a puzzle. It's actually a puzzle to try to figure out how she got those lines in there and how she got them to work. I'll have to get her to describe it to me the next time I see her. I always enjoy quilting challenges because they get you to think outside the box. The participants are encouraged to think differently from the way in which they normally think. And then when we share our results with one another, we get to enjoy what everyone else has come up with. I think that this challenge was a good success for the Guild. We had so many people participate, and we are so happy about that. And now we are able to share our wonderful results with you. We hope you enjoyed our presentation.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you to all the members who completed the Sudoku quilts. And thank you for watching. And please view the other videos on our channel. Take care and happy quilting. Bye-bye.